Welcome to the latest installment of Brandon Brothers. I'm Doug.
And I'm Johnny. Today we're continuing our conversation about generative AI ethics, specifically transparency.
All right, let's get to it.
And we're back. So, Doug, we're talking about transparency today,
Yes,
specifically how it relates to the HBS, the Higgins-Berger scale of AI ethics. We talked about that last episode.
Yes, and we even came up with an amazing mnemonic. Okay, I maybe came up with a questionable mnemonic about how Diggz and Doug intend to party.
And we're talking about the two.
We are talking about the transparency.
And it's not just transparency, it's it's disclosure, it's all of the things that we have like this new world of AI and where and when and how and all of the ethics that go along with this new capability that the world has, and specifically in creation of really creative usage.
Right. And really transparency isn't about compulsive disclosure, but that's one aspect that we're getting into. Obviously, there are some legal ramifications that we'll be talking about, but ultimately, what we're going to be diving into is how the Higgins-Berger scale of generative AI ethics has multiple components that we discussed in our previous episode.
You want to go over those again real quick?
Not really.
Diggz and
so,
Doug.
So Diggz and Doug, basically you've got data usage and privacy, right? So that's one of the Ds. The other D is displacement.
Okay.
Then intend to party is going to be intent.
Okay.
2 is transparency, what we're talking about today. And then P is potential for harm.
Okay.
And so we'll dive into all of those individually, show by show. But today we're going to dive into transparency. And the main reason we're diving into transparency is because that's the top option of our scale, right? So basically each one we're going to go through how we have quantified each component from a series of qualifications.
When you say top option, you're talking about the tool that you built.
That's right. If you go to r3mx.com/HBS, that will take you to this awesome utility that we put together that makes it so if you have any questions about the ethical implications of anything you've made with generative AI, you then complete this simple questionnaire that has a rating scale for each of those 5 components that we just mentioned.
So we kind of picked transparency because it's kind of bubbled up to the forefront in the news recently.
Right.
Well, I mean, you texted me a couple weeks ago and you were like, "Hey, did you see this new EU law, which requires companies to disclose the use of any AI
Right.
in their content product?" I mean,
And we're even seeing the disclosure of AI becoming automated,
Sure.
as we've talked about previously, where, you post something that has the metadata embedded in it. And speaking of Meta will make it so it automatically discloses that AI was
It'll
utilized.
flag the actual post as, gives you like a little AI info button, sorry. A little AI info button or like that you can click on that kind of explains their policy. It doesn't actually talk about how AI was used in this, but there is some a lot of the tools now are embedding signals or flags inside the actual content that they create to indicate to the distribution platforms that something has been at some point in its workflow has been touched by AI.
Well, let's talk about the workflow and how the scale is impacted by the workflow. So when you look at the Higgins-Berger scale, and you're utilizing the utility that we built, there's going to be a handy drop down that basically helps you ascertain what degree of really ethical cleanliness has been employed. So at the very top level is radical disclosure. So that is completely compliant with the laws being implemented in the EU that I believe roll out in August, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a similar but very different law that is being rolled out in California also at the same time in August, if I recall
Yeah, it
correctly.
doesn't stop there because there's also similar disclosures laws in other states and I'm sure other countries as well. It's moving from this sort of ethical gray area to a legal, less gray area.
Yeah, the complication is, from my perspective, the continuum is black and white on the extremes, right? So you're either doing your level best to disclose any potential utilization of generative AI at any point in the process versus the complete opposite, which is intentional obfuscation and not just being deliberate about it, but also with malicious intent. Then and on our scale, so our scale, it's a little bit complicated. So basically, we give 0 points for radical disclosure, and the goal, of course, is to get 0 points. The lower
It's
your,
like golf, right?
it's exactly like golf, except the par skips over number 3. So basically, you have. I'm gonna cheat here because I think that it's best for everybody involved. So basically, on our scale, a 0 would be a clear and accurate representation, right? So you are radically disclosing. Then there's and as I mentioned, it goes 0 points, 1 point, 2 points, 4 points. So then 4 points is going to be assessed if there's intentional obscuring or misleading claims.
Um, so an example of this would be what? Of where somebody might intentionally obscure the use of AI for some nefarious gain.
Right. So there are so many different use cases for this, but the most reasonable expectation for this to be employed is where, for example, let's say that there is a marketing coordinator who has been tasked to write blog posts. Well, obviously, you can generate blog posts to your heart's content using generative AI with minimal involvement, right? You give it a simple prompt, you say how many words or characters you want it to be, whether or not you tell it.
You can even like give it examples of your previous blog posts that your company has.
Right. You can feed it with whatever data you want.
Right.
And if this isn't limited to ChatGPT or Claude either,
Yeah.
it is.
A lot of tools do.
Yes, absolutely. And so obviously that bad actor doesn't care about this tool. However, their boss or their boss's boss does. And so that's where this comes into play, where someone discovers, because of this metadata that we just mentioned being embedded in the content, that they have discovered that one of their employees is utilizing AI and hasn't told anybody. And they haven't made it where it can be triaged for them to be able to see where in the process it was utilized, right? There is absolutely no path to connect the dots between humans in the loop versus straightforward generative AI.
So to take it to a little broader perspective, why would a manager or an owner or why is that, aside from the legal issues? Let's
Right.
just talk on the ethical side or the business decision side.
Sure.
Why would they care?
Perception, right? Perception is key. Do you want to be perceived as someone who makes stuff up? Do you want to be perceived as someone who doesn't originate their own content? Do you want to be perceived as inauthentic, right? What differentiates you from others? A big part of that is the human component.
it makes me think of there was he was I think it was a bank. It was a banking company that just announced a partnership with OpenAI, and he was doing a shareholder call, which is something a fiduciary call required by law, and he did this. It was sort of a gimmick. He did
Oh,
disclose it, but
right.
the first half of his talk or his on the call was his AI twin.
Right.
And he had created, and they were kind of showing off this technology, but you received some backlash because especially in a bank, trust is critically important.
But see that what you're talking about, because he took the initiative to disclose it after the fact, I would actually give that a 2,
Okay.
right? So what that means is minimal or unclear disclosure, but no ultimate deception, right?
Sure.
But what you're doing there is stepping into that other territory, which are deep fakes,
Hmm.
right? So when you're talking about celebrities, for example,
Or influencers of any type, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's become incredibly simple to oversimplify, uh,
Yeah.
to train AI to be able to have the voice mapping
Sure.
and the image mapping of a celebrity because there is so much. And celebrity, I mean,
Yeah.
not just someone who's talented on screen,
Or even
but an
you.
influence. Oh, I'm hardly a
No, but
celebrity, but
it wouldn't, if somebody wanted to, they could go back through our library of episodes,
oh,
which
absolutely,
are
yeah.
all available on YouTube. Um, and
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 Spotify or wherever you get your favorite
so
podcast.
link and subscribe. But so they could go through and create a digital version of what we're doing right now and
Right.
say AI is good and AI or transparency is not necessary. Like,
Yeah, and even
yeah,
the differing levels of what could be perceived as nefarious, right? Because as you and I had a conversation not long ago, we were discussing about how even though they're ripping off the likeness, right, the voice and
yeah,
the appearance of an influencer, for example, they're just echoing the same thoughts.
sure.
They're not even manipulating it to be a
Changing the
completely
message.
yeah, the
Okay.
message is basically the same.
Yeah.
It's being kept
But they're collecting followers based on people just not realizing that this is not the original
right.
content.
And then the next thing you know, they're following a pharmaceutical company.
Right, right, right. Now we while we're live right now and we're definitely not AI, we do use AI tools to complete these podcasts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what those tools are, it ranges, right? So the very first thing that we do is we process the video. And in processing the video, we have it automatically put together the first draft of our transcript. Because it's way easier for it to transcribe and then for us to go in and edit than for us to do it the old fashioned way, where you basically are like a stenographer and you keep hitting pause or hold down the pedal
Right.
to pause and play the video as you're typing in each word individually. So that
Did
a
we displace a stenographer?
I don't believe so because I know that in the past it was me.
Right, right.
So all I've done is employed
Saved
a
yourself some time.
right, by employing the utilization of this tool. And don't get me wrong, while it saves time, it still requires attention.
Right.
Then there's the other
And it's
piece.
not automatically doing this. I mean, you're literally like doing some copying and pasting and that kind of thing along the way, right?
Where required,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because there are times where, for example, it's terrible at transcribing
We're
the name.
identifying you versus me.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's terrible at identifying like words that go together. If you don't over articulate and put space between your words, the name of our podcast becomes completely different than what it actually is. So just about every single episode, I have to go in and edit the transcript where I introduce the show because I say it too quickly.
Ah.
But then, as you mentioned, we also use it for identifying who's talking. So the AI will look at our voices. it's able to map our voices and know who's talking. And so each episode, it goes back and forth and identifies who's talking when. It's mostly good at it. I must confess, we're pretty lazy at updating who the speaker is in the transcript. So to those of you who are
It would be
reading,
really ironic if this part of it was labeling me as having said it.
and so then we also utilize another AI component that automatically makes it sound better. And we do that more than once. So there's the initial
What's
post-processing.
it called? That feature.
Studio Sound
Okay.
is what it is called in the application that we use for editing our content. Then it gets uploaded to the platform that distributes the podcast. And there's another AI-enabled feature that upgrades the sound quality.
Right. And then we also will use AI to create summaries of the podcasts
That's right.
by using the transcript that has already been transcribed by AI. So there's
Yes.
multiple layers. Now, where does that fall in the disclosure or the transparency, a spectrum, if you will?
So, like I said, we have clear and accurate representation, right? That's 0 points. We have intentional obscuring and misleading claims. That's 4 points. We've touched on both of those, and we kind of got into what I feel like is a gray area because I don't think it's black and white. I feel like this is incredibly nuanced, and it relies upon the person who is assessing their work or the work of others. It definitely requires them to assert an opinion, to determine how gray the area is. In my opinion, what we would be at is a partial disclosure or clear human authorship, and that's 1 point.
Okay.
However, someone else might disagree and say that it's minimal or unclear disclosure, but no intentional deception, which would be 2 points,
That's true.
right? So it could be 1 or 2, but I would argue that we're closer to the 1. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have a modifier, which is openly acknowledging the utilization of AI. And as we mentioned moments ago, that's going to be a requirement. If you're putting content out in the EU, for example,
Right.
or in California for commercial gain. So I would argue that we're somewhere in between, but because we're not intentionally obfuscating it,
Sure.
I would argue that we're more of a 1 than a 2.
So, but that is a good example of how it's not really ever as cut and dry as we'd like it to be because, I recently was reading an article. Is a Nashville artist that she produces music that gets picked up by sync license organization, and she gets paid to have her music used in commercials or TV shows or whatever, background, whatever. It'll very legitimate business. A lot of people do. She co-wrote a song with another collaborator, and that other collaborator didn't disclose that they had prepared the demo using Suno or one of the
Like to anyone.
yeah, to anyone. Just said, hey, here's
Was it nefarious? Was it?
I don't think so. I think it was maybe an error of omission and didn't realize that the sync license company had a very strict no AI policy. And so when down the road in this workflow of this particular song, it made it past all the way to the sync license, all the way up to the licensee. And when you get the backlash that gets identified as having been originated with
generative
using
AI, yeah.
generative AI, that puts the sync company at risk, which also puts that artist at risk, and anybody that collaborator has collaborated with
Sure.
now all gets scrutinized because this is a problem because the sync license company and ultimately the companies that are buying this content or licensing it or using it for advertising or whatever, they they have their own policies, and so
Sure.
it one person's omission, even if it wasn't really intended to be nefarious, was caused all this cascading potential problem, which led this woman, this artist, to basically say she won't work with anybody who uses AI. And I think that's
It's an extreme
it's an
reaction, but
yeah,
I understand it because she experienced
a big backlash.
yeah, huge, right?
Yeah.
From my understanding, she basically was flagged as an AI artist
Sure.
and basically was having her income inhibited.
And so, obviously this creates a huge trust issue, the almost to the point that that chain of custody that is almost going to be required, just like evidence in court. You need to be able to take anything that is generated that is being sold or repurposed down the workflow. You have to be able to prove human involvement all the way down to its source.
Right. And I think that is really where the utilization of AI is within the ethical green zone, right? When you are utilizing it for good, you're utilizing it as a tool, not as an original content source. You have started to utilize it the way that we're utilizing AI everywhere, right? So we've been using AI for the longest time with spell check and grammar check
Sure.
baked into Microsoft Word and Google whatever Google is. I can't even
Docs.
remember Docs. Yes. Thank you for chiming in. So yeah, as far as the scale is concerned, obviously where that her cohort fell was as a 2, right? It wasn't done with malicious intent. It didn't have any open acknowledgement of AI as a modifier. And so as a result, 2 points would be assessed, and 2 points is definitely on the way to the orange, if not the red zone,
The
which are bad.
the human in the loop part of this, I think, the courts have already been coming out with, if allowing AI to have, copyrightable, specifically with the copyright law, how to, if there's a significant human input, it can be copyrightable. But if it's pure AI, if someone just hit generate on a minimal prompt,
Right.
then that's not copyrightable, and that's that's where the law stands right now.
Which makes sense
Yeah.
because the content is being drawn from somewhere, right? I mean, we know that it's being trained on data. We know that it's really about pattern recognition, but ultimately there are strings of sentences. There are strings of melodies. There are strings of pixels making images that are being sampled from somewhere else. And it's only a matter of time where we find that it's a lot like how music sampling was back in the late 20th century.
Sure. That
The late 20th century, I feel so old.
back in the
Back in the 1900s.
Yeah, but you're right. That was incredibly disruptive when sampling started. There are all kinds of lawsuits and ethical considerations, but at the end of the day, the industry accepted it and built workflows and disclosures and
all the
credits
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And remuneration, right? Royalties,
Sure,
making sure
sure.
that people were being paid for the music that they created that was ultimately sampled.
Right.
Right. And I'm sure Mike McDonald is doing all right.
Yes. Whoa.
Forget.
So, I mean, I think, to sort of wrap this up with a nice little bow, I think we really can't because
Because
legally
there are 4 other components of the
well,
HBS.
there are 4 other, but I'm specifically with transparency.
Yeah.
The legal ramifications are still evolving,
Yep.
and we're going to continue seeing that. That's why we created the HBS as an evolving
Sure.
framework.
And just to be clear, there are ways of radical disclosure without it being a giant warning message. For example, you've created a website. That website has blog posts. Those blog posts, you've used AI perhaps as a means to edit the content. You've perhaps used AI as a means to find strengths and weaknesses in the content in order to buttress what you're putting forward. Do you have to say outright underneath that article that AI has been utilized from it? Some people would argue yes. However,
I see it
I
sometimes.
I would say I would go so far as to say it is appropriate and highly ethical to put that disclosure in the terms of use statement for the website. Mostly because this day and age, chances are very great that someone has used AI, whether or not they've realized it in the process, right? How often do you type, see basically the idea of what you're saying and hit the space bar because you don't want to type out those next 5 words because those are effectively the 5 words you want to
You
say.
would have chosen anyway.
So in that instance, you're using AI.
Sure. Yeah. It's a it's a really the modern generative AI models are really fancy autocomplete. I mean, and
They
that
really are. Yeah.
it works almost exactly the same way. It's just a really, really more advanced way of doing it.
And so in the realm of transparency, if you're using generative AI and it's meant to originate content, you probably don't even belong here when it comes to evaluating the ethical concerns. This is really more about when you're editing an image, for example, and you highlight a segment because you want to delete it. Adobe, for example, uses Firefly, which is their AI component, to assess what pixels should go in and replace the other pixels that
Mm.
you've highlighted with the marquee. And if you just highlight with the marquee and hit generate, you without a prompt, you're basically playing the roulette
Mhm.
or
Yeah,
the
it'll give you
one-armed
like 3
bandit.
options of different smudges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, do you have to have this radical disclosure that you use this tool? I would say not so much. However, as an agency, the right thing to do is to be forthcoming with your customers and say, "Hey, in
Right.
case there's any concern, we do utilize generative AI as a tool. We don't use it for originating content, but we do use it to help us generate better content."
Sure. I mean, if there's an image that the client wants to use, but there's a paper bag in the background that they would rather not be there, and you use a tool to make that paper bag go away, um, that rather than the expense of doing a whole new photo shoot, and the
Right.
time.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, we've been editing images since before Photoshop
Yeah, sure.
and doing those types of things since before Photoshop, but now we have a tool that makes it simpler, makes
Right.
it more effective, right? We're saving money and making more money as a result. So really at the end of the day, it comes down to the appropriate levels of disclosure. So my recommendation, just be transparent. Tell your customers you use AI as a tool. Tell your website visitors in your terms of use or your privacy policy that you utilize generative AI as a tool. And really, it's more of a CYA, cover your ass,
Yeah.
than anything else, because everybody that you work with will appreciate your candor and honesty, because that means trust. And that's really what this is all about, is creating trust signals.
I think that's a great way to end this episode. Next time, we're going to continue our discussion about the Higgins-Berger scale of AI ethics.
And we're going to go into the potential for harm.
The potential for harm. That's a good one, because
Thanks.
I've been thinking a lot about
that was actually your contribution to the model.
Well, the potential, it's a great one because it gets into use cases. So, the difference between using AI to modify a picture that you're going to post on your personal Facebook versus using AI to modify a picture that Coca-Cola is using at the Super Bowl. So
yeah,
it's going to be an exciting episode.
Palpable.
Please like and subscribe, and we appreciate all of you guys listening. And I've noticed that we've got listeners from all over the world.
All over the world. It's crazy.
Yeah. So we would appreciate it if some of you would say hi in the comments and tell us where you're from and what you like and what you want to hear about.
Thank you for tuning in to Brand of Brothers. Big thank you to our presenting sponsor, Remix, the branding agency, along with production assistance from Johnny Diggz, Simon Jacobson, and me, Doug Berger. We can't forget music by PRO. Speaking of not forgetting, remember to do that like and subscribe thing, and find us at brandshowlive.com and follow us on the socials at Brand Show Live.